Hello, good evening. How's everybody doing today? Wait a few minutes while some more people pop in. Hope you don't mind if I mute you. There we go. So we have a few people coming in, and we'll start in just a few moments. Let me make sure I know what I'm saying tonight. Baruch Hashem. Okay. I think we might start now. A few people are here, and we're about a minute late, so that's okay. We'll start now. We're gonna go. I'm gonna share my screen if I remember how to do that. And so you have the sources and sources right there. Okay. Shem. Hey, good evening, everybody. Welcome to Parshat Chayei, Sara 5781. A lot to learn. We're going to have, I noticed looking over the material, it looks like we're going to have quite a focus on Musar and interesting lessons that we can get from Gematria and such. So, again, one of the themes that I'd like to impart in these classes, one of the common threads, is that the Torah is not just is actually it's interesting. I just had a conversation about this with a coworker. He asked me, "How come when I read the Bible, I get a different message than from when you read the Bible?" Interesting question. First of all, I mean, I didn't want to get into it, but his Bible is a little different. There's translation involved and all kinds of warped commentary based on misunderstandings and what they want to understand, how they want to understand the text. And a lot of it has to do with, like all literature, it has a lot to do with what you bring to the text. The commentaries that I'm bringing tonight and always really are not just not just somebody writing a commentary on the Torah who has no experience with that kind of thing. And I remember in a library once I saw that Isaac Asimov, the famous science fiction writer, he wrote a commentary on the Bible. What does he know about the Bible? I mean, he could have studied it for years and years. It's true, but he's coming to it with a perspective already, with certain baggage, for lack of a better term. The baggage that Talmidei Chachamim bring with them when they look at Torah is all Torah. In other words, there's a difference between me looking at a star or at a constellation with my fogged up glasses and not knowing what I'm looking for. And there's a difference between that and an astronomer, an expert, looking at the stars using powerful, the most powerful technology in the world, to look at what he knows he's looking at. It's a very different thing. So when Rashi looked at a pasuk, it's not like just Joe Schmo off the street looking at a pasuk. It's Rashi with his whole baggage, his whole luggage, his whole entire wardrobe of Torah that he has with him, using that as a perspective, as a lens through which to look at Torah. So we're going to have a lot of Rashis tonight. We're going to have, God willing, a lot of interesting commentary, and I hope we all are able to gain from it. Let's start with a very famous Rashi. The very first pasuk in this parsha says, "V'yiyu Chayei Sara," and the Sarah's life, right, was Mea Shana, was 100 years, V'esrim Shana, and 20 years, V'sheva Shanim, and 7 years, Shnei Chayei Sarah. These were the days of Sarah's life. So this is a very strange way to say somebody's age, or even their age at death. And it's a strange pasuk which has a lot of commentary on it, of course. But the most famous is probably Rashi. He quotes a midrash. A similar idea is brought in other places as well. I believe the Gemara says something like this. So it says Rashi. Why are we saying her life was 100 years, 20 years, and 7 years? Lekach nichtav shana b'chol klal v'klal. So each year is given a separate category. Lomar lachat to teach you shekol echad nidrash la'asmo. Each one can teach something. You can gain something from seeing each one. But kuf kivat chaf lechet. When she was 100 years old, she was as innocent as a 20-year-old with regard to sin. Ma bat chaf lo chata, shere inu bat anashim, af bat kuf velo chet. And so we know the Gemara teaches us that a person is not punished for certain sins until they're 20 years old. So all the sinning you can do before you're 20 is certain categories. Of course, they're not punished. What happens? Why? That's probably not for discussion right now. But for whatever reason, you're not considered mature enough. Your brain hasn't developed enough until you're 20, and then you can be responsible for everything you do. So when Sarah was 100 years old, she was as innocent as she was when she was 20. In other words, she had no sin at all. And he concludes, and when she was 20, she was as beautiful as a 7-year-old. She was as beautiful as a 7-year-old. So what are we talking about? Innocence and beauty and these sorts of things. What's happening here? Why can't you be innocent as a 20-year-old? So Rav Hirsch has an interesting, beautiful comment here that was relevant in his day, and I think is very much more relevant today. He says, thus, somebody needs to be muted. I'll do that. I'll take care of that. All right, here we go. Let's see. All right, Baruch Hashem. Okay, everybody's muted now, and we're not going to be disturbed. So it says Rav Samson Raphael Hirsch. He says, thus Sarah took the beauty of childhood into young adulthood, and she retained the innocence of a woman of 20 all the days of her life. This view of our sages contrasts greatly with the view that is commonly held in our time, and not necessarily to our advantage. The sages look for beauty not in the woman of 20, but in the girl of 7, and for innocence not in childhood, but in young adulthood. Right? We are accustomed to speaking of the innocence of a child, but it would be sad if one would have to envy children their innocence, for innocence presupposes the possibility of guilt. Innocence means to have struggled with sensuality and passion and to have overcome them. Only a girl who has matured into womanhood and only a boy who has matured into manhood, only they can reach the level of true innocence. In other words, innocence isn't as was true in his day, as society thought then, and I'm sure it's just been amplified since then, and society feels the same way now, that innocence is this, purity, innocence, this babies are innocent. No, babies are not innocent. They're not innocent because they haven't struggled for innocence. Innocence is something that's acquired through effort, says Rav Hirsch. We can become innocent. We have to get to that level of tmimut, of innocence. And that's what Sara was. That's why Sara is innocent at 100 years old as she was when she was 20. Not to do with sin, punishment, etc., etc. No, it's because a 20-year-old is the only person who can become innocent. Once you're 20, that's when that can start happening. That's when you have a struggle and you have to fight to become innocent, to stay innocent. And Sarah did that. And that's why when she was 100, She was still that innocent. And that's what the pasuk is praising her for. It's interesting also, I don't have the source, obviously, because as you'll see in a moment, the source is from a speech that was within the week. But Rav Tendler gave a eulogy, as did many people, during the Levi, during the funeral, during the speeches for Rav David Feinstein, who just passed away, Zecher Tzadok Livracha. And one of the things he said was actually something related to this. He said Rav David Feinstein would ask the question. We just saw the Rashi that says that when she was 20, she was as beautiful as a 7-year-old. Why is a 7-year-old beautiful? And it's okay, kids are cute, don't get me wrong, but there's beautiful 20-year-olds too. You don't become ugly all of a sudden after age 7. An 8-year-old isn't an ugly duckling all of a sudden. What's happening? Why isn't the 20-year-old considered beautiful? Why is the 7-year-old the epitome of beauty? So Rav Tendler said over in Rav David Feinstein's name, this should be a schus for us to be able to learn his words. He said that when you look at a 7-year-old, any 7-year-old's got an outfit on that's a little too tight, not comfortable, too snug in the wrong places. So you forgive them. It's a 7-year-old, it's still cute. Yeah, obviously the child should change, but it's not the end of the world. 20-year-old, we don't forgive any single. we don't forgive. Society doesn't forgive a 20-year-old for making that kind of a misstep. So a 7-year-old is that beautiful. Beauty doesn't just mean physical appearance. Beauty is also this sort of the sort of grace where almost anything can be forgiven them. And that's what Rav David Feinstein says about why a 7-year-old is the epitome of beauty. All right, so that's a beautiful thought that I heard just this week, obviously. All right, next pasuk. We're gonna be sort of in this realm for a little bit longer. The next pasuk, just after we find out how old Sara was at the end of her life, it says V'tamat Sara, and Sara died. B'Kiryat Arba, in a place called Kiryat Arba, he Hebron. This is Hebron. Be'eretz Canaan, in the land of Canaan. V'yavo Avraham dispod l'Sara v'liv kota. And so Avraham came to eulogize her and to cry for her. And where did he come from? What was he doing? So the Rashi and many other commentaries explain that where were we just now? What happened in the last pasuk, right before the last pasukim, right before we find out about Sarah's death, was the Akedah, the sacrifice of Yitzchak, and that's where Avraham came from. That was his that was the place where he was. He was by the Akedah. He was over there. He was in Beersheba. He was in different places, but he wasn't where Sarah was when Sarah died. That's what many of the commentaries explain. But Rav Dessler has an interesting question regarding that. We often think that the Akedah was Abraham's last test, his hardest test. We know, and we've talked about this last week, that Avraham was tested with 10 challenges. Whatever they were, there's a difference of opinion with Rashi, Rambam. There's other commentaries explaining why how we get to the number of 10. Really, the number is a lot more than that. Just looking at the psukim, even if you ignore the midrashim like the Rambam does, nevertheless, there's still a lot more challenges than 10. So Rav Dessler, as you're about to see, counts this, in other words, Sarah's death and how Avraham has to deal with it, as one of those tests. Perhaps the most difficult, as we'll see. So this is Rav Dessler in volume 4 of Michtav Mi'Eliyahu. He writes, Derech Eretz Kadmon LaTorah. This is the name of the chapter. So there's a concept that Derech Eretz, in other words, social behavior, for lack of a better word, trumps Torah in some way. Amru Razal, So he quotes he quotes the rabbis. Actually, let's start with the third line. It says, he quotes from Pirkei Avot. It says, "Im ein derech eretz ein Torah." If you don't have derech eretz, if you don't know how to deal correctly with people, you don't have Torah. Pirish Rabbeinu Yonah. So he quotes the commentary of Rabbeinu Yonah, one of the Rishonim. Rotolomar means to say, "Shetzarech tchila letakin et atzmo b'midot." Before you learn Torah, to really get Torah right, you need to first clear yourself of bad midot. You have to fix bad midot. Letaken et atzmo b'midot ubezeh tishkon haTorah alav. And that way, Torah will come upon you. She'einena shochenet le'olam b'guf she'ena bal midot tovot. You can't get the Torah to rest upon somebody who is not a master of good behavior. And he goes on that topic. So let's skip. Let's get to what does this have to do with Avraham? So he says, "V'hanisoyon hayoter gadol b'chayei Avraham Avinu alav shalom haya kishechazar min ha'akeda." The biggest test, he says, like I said before, the biggest test in Abraham's life was when he returned from the Akedah, when he returned from the binding of Yitzchak. Umatza shemita alav Sara ishto, and he saw that Sara, his wife, died. And he quotes, he says, look at Rashi over there, on this pasuk that we're learning right now. Lo od, and that's not all. Ela kishe bikesh lekorva v'lo matza makom. He wanted to bury her, and he couldn't find a place. Imagine. Ki im v'damim merubim, and there's it was a lot of money. V'hine chitim sheyashu bechevron yadu shakadosh baruch hu natan Avraham et haaretz. They knew, says he paraphrases from the Ramban. They knew, the people of the Hittites who lived there. They knew in Hebron that land was given to Avraham. Shazu kavanat Amram nasi elokim ata b'tochenu. This is why they call him a nasi elokim. V'afal pike, nevertheless, hatmu milhakut lo chezet kever. He still had to go buy. He had to do business now. He's his wife. His wife of so many years has died. She's laying there in front of him, waiting to be buried. He had just passed an emotional roller coaster of the Akedah, of thinking he had to kill his son, not killing his son, and finally here he is, and now he has to do business. He has to buy a place. He has to buy a place. He has to take care of these things. This is ridiculous. Imagine how frustrating this was. How easily frustrated we would be in much simpler conditions. He's in. I'm skipping to the next paragraph. He's in mourning right now. Keep in mind, his dead wife is right in front of him. That's mispad. He has to eulogize, and he's crying. And his nevuah went away from him somewhat. Nevertheless, habalig al nemar bishivat. Can't see what it says there. Right. So he still has to deal with all of this. So what does he do? Tzaro vidnaheg im b'nei chet halalu derech eretz. He still deals with them kindly, even though he's got all this on his mind. He's got quite a full plate, and nevertheless, he's going to deal with them kindly. Klal gadol b'derech eretz. So this is Avraham. No matter what's going on, he's going to deal with people with derech eretz. Mipnei shani mitzar lo tzarich hasheni lisvo. This is an amazing thing that no matter what else is happening, he doesn't change his behavior. pamayim. So nevertheless, over and over again, he's going to be nice to them. V'alibo l'chashav af l'rega shelahad chanchif lahem asazot. So he's gonna, regardless of everything that's going on, imagine again, huge emotional roller coaster, up and down. Good, almost killed his son, saved his son, comes home, his wife is dead. Now he has to buy land that he really owns anyway, and nevertheless deals with everybody with derech eretz. That's how important derech eretz is. Let's skip to the last line. It says, "Ela baruhu," and it's clear. Kechama she'Avram Avinu alav hasholom midnaheg imahem b'derech eretz kazu mipnei shehakir et achiyuv et ve'et hechrach lehitnaheg kacha. He felt it was an obligation. He had to deal with. He has to deal with people with derech eretz. We have this all the time. We have an emotional roller coaster in our lives all the time, in positive and negative. For example, I'll give you the positive. We go. It's a holiday. It's a Yom Tov. Go to shul. We're inspired. There's great speeches, beautiful davening. Back before, back when we can go in person. Right? It was an emotional, beautiful, uplifting time. You're on your way home, and what do you see? Your Gentile neighbors are washing their car. Like, what happened? Why aren't they as inspired as you are? It knocks you off, knocks the wind out of your sails a little bit when you see that. But that's not supposed to happen. We are supposed to be inspired regardless of what's happening in our lives. We're supposed to always be clear that Hashem is there, and we're supposed to have derech eretz and act kindly, no matter how bad your workday was, no matter how great it was, no matter what's happening. Derech eretz kadmol Torah. Before anything else, you need to have derech eretz. And when you have derech eretz, then you'll have Torah. That's what the Michtav Meliyahu is writing. All right, we're going to skip a few psukim. Making this deal with Ephron, Avraham is talking to the people, to the Hittites, and he's trying to get the land of Marat HaMachpela. And finally, Avraham says, "How much do you want for it?" Ephron says, "I don't want anything. Take it for free." Avraham's like, "Okay, come on. How much do you want for it?" And Ephron says, "What's 400? Between people like us, it's not a big deal. 400, the money back then. Over lasocher, he calls it." Let's look at this pasuk when he finally, Avraham obviously understands Ephron's insinuations and says, "V'yishma Avraham," and Avraham heard, meaning he got it. Right? V'yishma Avraham et Ephron, Yushkol Avraham Ephron, and he counted out for Ephron et hakesef, the silver, asher diber bi'aznei bnei Chet, all the money that Ephron said in the ears of the people of Chet, the Hittites. Arba meot shekel, 400 pieces of silver, kesef, over lasocher, which is usually translated as the merchant's rates. Whatever the rate was, it's so acceptable, says Rashi, that anybody would accept it. It was bona fide money. It was good money. Maybe we can learn something deeper in this phrase, as the Chomat Anoch wants to do. Again, remember, there's lots of hints and lots of important lessons in the Torah, not just the story itself. So, Efshar l'romes, you could also find a hint. The kodem otiot socher hem otiot nezek. In other words, over means above, or it could also mean sort of like before. The letters before. So the letters before the word socher. So socher is samach, chet, reish, and the letter before samach in the aleph bet is nun. The letter before chet in the aleph bet is zayin. And the letter before Reish in the Aleph Bet is Kuf, which spells out Nun, Zayin, Kuf, spells out Nezek, which means damage. So the over lashon kodem. So it's like the over means like before. So like the letter before socher, the letters before socher spell out nezek. Come over la siyatan. So he gives a hint. Sorry, he gives a proof to how over can mean that. V'chein Ephron dehaya ra ayin. So just like Ephron, who had a bad eye, hayalo nezek, he basically was not that we see any punishment to him, but people like that get damaged if you don't understand that Hashem gives you your money, and if you feel you need to be twisted with ethically and do all kinds of trickery, your money is not going to be worth the weight, worth its weight in gold. It's going to be it's going to cause more damage than good. Kamosha Shirazal, as the rabbis darshas, the rabbis explain, Allah Hakatuv, and regarding him, it says the pasuk, "Lo yada ki chaser yavonu the otiot sachar maseh chaser nasa chaser cheser." So chaser means loss, and the word socher, which we've been using as merchant, are the same letters as chasar, as meaning missing. So if you're not a good socher, if you're not a good merchant, if you try trickery and lying and try to make money illegally, unethically, you're going to have chasar, you're going to have a loss. Zu tochachat musar l'chol sachar the yeshim neged enav ki mipnei sachar nezek. If you're not a good socher, if you're not a good merchant, if you're going to not have ethics, you're going to have damage, says he. Otiot chasar. So as he said, those are the letters of chasar. So again, so there's ethical lessons we can learn, not just from the story itself, but even from the wording that's used. This is not a humanly written book, the Torah. It was written by Hashem. So there are codes deep within it. So in words like over lasocher, Talmidei Chachamim, great rabbis, can teach you that there's greater lessons that you can learn for your own life in just listening to the amazing words. All right, so we're going to skip quite a bit. So what happens is later on in the story, not so much later, Avraham buries Sara, and he realizes that he needs to take care of his future progeny. His son Yitzchak is not married yet, and he needs to find him a wife. And for whatever reason, and of course there's quite a bit of commentary on this, Avraham decides that the best match for his son will be from his family, which is all the way back, not in Eretz Canaan, all the way back where he came from in Syria. So he sends his trusted servant Eliezer to go there to find a wife for his son Yitzchak. And Yitzchak and Eliezer does. He goes there. He finds Rivka. He has this whole test, which we'll hopefully learn about in future years. He asks. He prays to Hashem. He says, "Please, if I'm going to find a girl, and I'm going to ask her to bring water to my camels, and if she does, no, I'm going to ask for water for myself, and if she brings water for my camels, that's how I'll know that she's the right girl for Yitzchak." This is the Gemilut Chasadim that he saw in Avraham's house. He wanted to see and test if that would be something that he can find in a proper wife for Yitzchak. So he does this test, and Rivka passes the test, and so now he's invited to Rivka's house, to her parents' house, where he now tells Bethuel, her father, and Lavan, her trickster brother, and her unnamed mother. Almost, she's not unnamed, but so he basically tells the story all over again, and it's very unique. We'll talk about that in the next comment. But one thing's for sure, usually we don't have such a long repetition of story, especially a story that doesn't seem very significant. And what he does every once in a while is he makes a few changes here and there in the story from what actually happened or from the wording that's used. So let me give you an example. And this is a famous example. The Omar El Aduni, he's saying when he was talking to Avraham about finding this wife for Yitzchak, he told Avraham, maybe she won't follow me. What should I do? Now, Ulai is maybe, perhaps, and Ulai spelled as it is in Pasuk, chapter 24, Pasuk 39, is Ulai without a vav. When he was speaking to Avraham, he said it with a vav. Doesn't seem like a big deal, but again, each letter in the Torah can teach many, many valuable lessons. So the Dubno Magid says, "Omar El Adoni, I said to my master, Ulai lo telecha isha acharei. Perhaps this girl, this woman, will not come after me, will not follow me." Says the Dubno Magid. Hine Rabbi Me'iru. Many people point out, Ma Ra Hakatuv, the Rames al Zot, but Ma'ar Eliezer El Lavan Betuel. Why is the pasuk hinting? What is the pasuk hinting to? While he's speaking now to Lavan and Betuel, V'lo L'dvarav HaKodmim El Avraham Adoni. And why doesn't? Why wasn't this lesson made before? What lesson? Kisham Nemar over there. It says Ulai Lo Toveh. Ulai with a vav, male bevav was spelled completely with a vav. And why does it say here chaser without a vav? Hello, yoter mehatzedek hayal ramez b'mi she'alav nogea hadavar who Avraham. It doesn't even say who it is that it's Avraham. Hein emet ki midrash samchu midrash hazeh. Hadrash Azeh al Ulai Harishon. The Midrash comments on the first time that it says Ulai with the Vav. Shamar Eliezer Avraham when he was talking to Avraham. This is what it says in the Midrash on that pasuk. I think that's pasuk A, if I'm not mistaken. Vayomer alav ha'eved, and the Eved, in other words, Eliezer said to him, Hadahu, even it says, Kanan biado ozne mirmal osek ahev. Why do we need Kanan ze Eliezer biado ba'ozne mirma shaya yoshev umashgil et bito. He was really hoping that Avraham would say, oh, in that case, don't worry if he doesn't want to follow behind you. Don't worry, you can just come home and Yitzchak will marry your daughter. Ruya Ena Ruya. He was basically trying to hint to Avraham that his own daughter was worthy of Yitzchak. Okay. So now let's skip to almost the end of this paragraph. 4 lines from the bottom of this paragraph. L'chora lo yadanu madua hevi Rashi zal dikdu kasheni. Why is Rashi focusing on the second one? Kedei lavo el be'er ha'inyan nichbonen od me ha'ita zot Eliezer ma'ara al kacha legalot zot al uzon Lavan and Betuel. Why is Eliezer saying this to Lavan and Betuel? So before he gets into the mashal, into the Dubno Magid, so that's what he does. He gives mashalim, he gives allegories to try to explain a difficult psukim. So the big question here is, what is Eliezer doing? Why is he telling Betuel and Lavan that he was hinting that his daughter is good enough? It's not a good sales pitch. This is not the time to be doing that. And anyway, why is he doing that with his wording? He's not actually saying it. He's hinting to it with a vav, without a vav. There's a different pronunciation, I guess, with or without a vav. Otherwise, I mean, obviously, Lavan and Betuel aren't reading this. What's happening here? Why is he doing this? Why originally did he hint that his daughter was good enough, and now in the change of words, he's not hinting to it anymore? What's happening? So says the Dubno Magid, and I'll just basically say this out because we're going to run low on time. But there was a socher, there was a seller, it was a businessman, Shaya Mischaro b'merchak tamid al yedei mishulacho. He always worked through a messenger. and he would try to get the best deals from, say, a wholesaler. And one time he decided, you know, why am I always being so honest? Why not try to trick this guy? I've always been giving him money ahead, and he's been sending the merchandise. Uh, so maybe this time what I'll do is I'll ask for the merchandise. My credit is good. I'll tell the wholesaler that this time I want the merchandise first, and I'll pay later. And instead, I'll take the merchandise and I'll split. I'll leave town. I'll go to Aruba and sell the stuff. Why do I have to stay in town for and pay money for something that I can get for free? So he wants to do this. He says this to the messenger. He wants to send the messenger on this errand, and the messenger is not as this. He must have learned the earlier pasuk, how important it is to be honest, and he says to him, you do this. You go to the wholesaler. You tell him, please, my credit is good. Why don't you give me this stuff? I'll pay you later. The wholesaler doesn't want to be involved in this, right? He wants to be honest. He wants to be ethical. He's learned some Torah already. Derech Eretz he has. So he doesn't want to deal with this kind of bad stuff. So what does he do? He goes to the wholesaler and he talks to the wholesaler. And what does he say to him? He says, um, I had a conversation with the buyer, and the buyer said we were talking back and forth. And one of the things I asked the seller, say the buyer, sorry, I said to him, what if the wholesaler won't want to give you the merchandise on credit? What if? Now, the wholesaler is not a fool, and he must realize that if the messenger for the buyer is speaking like this, obviously something fishy is going on. And so he refused to sell the produce, the product. He refused to sell it on credit because something must be going on. Something's weird. Why is he repeating this conversation? And so that's what Eliezer was doing. He was hoping to destroy the deal right there by mentioning that there's an alternative. Maybe this isn't a good deal. Maybe you shouldn't send your daughter after me. So maybe they won't send. And if they don't send, then Eliezer's done what he could do. And now he can go back to Avraham. And then his daughter will be good enough for Yitzchak. There's nobody else available. So this is Eliezer scheming a little bit. Obviously, Eliezer was a good person, and we can't really blame him for wanting to marry into to this amazing family and to have his daughter marry Yitzchak HaTzadik. But nevertheless, that's what, according to the Maggid of Dubno, that's what he was trying to do. He's trying to fool, basically, or not really fool, but really break the deal that Betuel and Lavan would be privy to the idea that really something fishy is going on, and they won't send their daughter or sister with Eliezer, and in that way, Eliezer can marry his daughter to Abraham. So that's how the Dubno Maggid understands that, and obviously we're sort of going in order here, but really this comment that we're learning next, really it's a later pasuk, but it's a very important idea that we probably should have learned first, and that's the idea of why is there this whole story to begin with. It says, again, this is Eliezer telling the whole story. Ve'avo hayom el ha'ayin. I came that day to the spring of water. Omar Hashem Elokei Adoni. So that he brings. He's retelling the entire prayer that he said, and he said, God, the God of my master Avraham, Im yesh chana matzliach darki. If you want to make if you want to plan on making my message, my shlichut, my mission, sorry, successful. That which I'm doing. So please make me successful. So says Rashi, And this is the famous uh, so this is the famous Rashi. Rashi wants to know why uh, why is he telling all of these details? Hayom Mitzati Hayom Bati. He's saying that on the day that I left is the day that I arrived. Again, traveled from Israel to Syria in one day. Mikan Shekafza Lo Haaretz. Basically, the land contracted for him miraculously. Amar Rabbi Acha Yafa Sichatan Shel Avde Avot Levnei Makom Mitoratan Shel Banim. The words of the servants of our forefathers is greater than the Torah of their children. It's very long, the whole parsha of Eliezer. So many psukim. He's retelling the story in such detail, more detail than maybe than a flood story, more detail than the creation of the earth. That's how many psukim are involved here, and it's repetition. You didn't have to tell it to begin with, but even if you do tell it, at least give a gifter version. Like and Eliezer said what happened, but no, it goes into so much detail, telling over exactly pasuk by pasuk, almost exactly the same thing. So that's how valuable Hashem sees the words of the servants of our ancestors. Why is that the case? So says Rav Eli Munk in the Call of the Torah. Rav Acha said, and he quotes this midrash again, quotes the Rashi. The conversation of the servants of the patriarchs is more precious to God than the Torah of their children. The whole episode of Eliezer is repeated here twice, whereas many essential points of the Torah are merely hinted at. Right? It doesn't say how many walls a sukkah needs to have. That we learn it out from the sukkah, basukah. We learn it out from little hints and allegations. We don't. There's a lot of times the Torah has to hint to things. Here, it's told over in great detail twice. Says Rav Munk, the method of deducing important laws from certain allusions in the text is destined to add to Jewry's merit. The Jewish people delve into the slightest details of the sacred text in order to discover the divine will. That's what we do. We're Farmers Insurance, and that's what we do, right? We're Jewish people, and that's what we do. When we learn Torah, we delve, we dive right into it and try to find every single possible allusion, hints, gematrias, the letters before each letter of each word. We try to really get as much as we can from each pasuk of the Torah, and that's very precious to Hashem. Right? But the Torah does not lack for words when it comes to clearly bringing out moral principles, such as those which are to direct preparations for a marriage. Here we have the first shidduch, really, besides obviously Adam and Chava, that Hashem created the shidduch. It's a little bit, at least, it didn't seem very organic. There's a lot of miracles involved. Here it's a regular, normal life shidduch, right? Man and woman being put together by normal means, right? And the Torah wants to show you every single detail of how that happened, of the morals, of the ethics involved, as we've been saying before. It develops them thoroughly and connects them with the original thought of the patriarchs as faithfully reflected even in the words and deeds of their servants. He's just a servant. He's just a slave to Avraham. And even his words are so pure. And he's praising Hashem, Baruch Hashem this and Baruch Hashem that, right? No detail is superfluous. No repetition is extraneous. When uniting the lives of two human beings in matrimony is at stake. That's that. When we're dealing with real life, as this was, we're marrying two complete strangers to each other, we need all the details we can get, and that's how important that is. And that's the lesson. That's why Eliezer's words are repeated in such detail. Okay. Okay. Eventually, he convinces them. They say, yes, she can go. There's a little bit of a hiccup, but we'll learn about that, God willing, in future years. But eventually, Rivka is following Eliezer. Eliezer goes. They see Yitzchak. He's in the field who say he's praying in the field. He just come back from possibly bringing, says Rashi says, bringing keturah to Avraham. All right, so we're up to now Perek Chav Dalet Pasuk Samech A. So 24:65. We've skipped many pasukim, and here we are. So Rivka asks Eliezer, "Who is that man?" Tomer El Ha'eved. It's interesting, by the way. Throughout this whole story, he's not called Eliezer; he's called Eved, because that's in essence who he is. He's a servant of Avraham. He does only what Avraham tells him to do. Even that one time when he tried to sort of finagle his way out of it because he wanted his daughter for Yitzchak, even then he didn't just reject them and say, never mind, you're not good enough, see you later. He didn't turn around and go home and lie to Avraham. He can't lie to him. He's an Eved. Okay. So Tomar El Eved. So the servant answered her, Miha ish halazeh haholech. No, so she asks Eliezer, Miha ish halazeh haholech b'sadeh. Who's this person walking? This man walking in the field? Likratenu. Towards us of Vayomer Ha'eved, and Eliezer answered back to her, "Who Aduni? That is my master. V'tikach hatzaif v'titchas." So she took her veil and she covered herself with her veil. I guess that was the custom back then. Maybe there was a pandemic, right? They had to cover their faces. It could be in the Middle East. We know in the Middle East now for sure. It is a standard of modesty for women to cover their faces. Okay. And so we're going to quote now from Moshe David Valeh. Again, I've mentioned him before. He is the teacher and student of the Ramchal. He has a sefer called Or Olam on basically every pasuk in the Torah, and usually learning out deeper Kabbalistic, sometimes secrets and other things, other concepts. We learned from him before. Let's see what he says here. It says V'tikach hatzaif v'titkas. Right, so she took her veil and she covered herself with it. Aval hasodhu. So he gave another commentary before. He says there's a sod here. There's a secret. In other words, there's something deeper. There's a deeper, possibly Kabbalistic idea going on here. Ki tseif, the word for this veil or scarf, right? Tseif, Allah Kaminyan Ner. The gematria of Tseif, which is 90, 70, 10, and 80, right? So it's 120. So it equals, so 160 plus 90, so 250, 250. And Ner, which is 50 plus 200, is also 250. The same gematria as Ner, which is candle. So here he says, very deep idea, and we can maybe pause here and ask. We probably won't have time. The last questions at the end. It says Shahare Haisha Hi Bebechina Ner Lekabi Baala. A woman in mystical thought is the candle of her husband. What does that mean? Uvala or mitzdo umeira. His light goes on to her. She is the reflection of his light. Think about that concept for a second. Right? Just like a candle holds a flame, so the flame that is within a husband is the torch that becomes her head. Okay, metaphorically, obviously. The ha late la megamra klum, megamra klum. V'zehu hatam, and this is the reason, he says, not a reason. He says this is the reason. Sheha nesuot mechasot et roshehen. This is the reason why women who get married cover their hair. We know there's a halacha It's not a custom. It's not a stringency. It's a halacha. The married women are supposed to cover their hair. Now, if this is a matter of modesty, let me just break this down for you for a moment. If this is a matter of modesty, then a woman should cover her hair as soon as she is of age, like they do in Muslim countries, or even earlier, even before they're of age. As soon as they're beautiful, as soon as they're 7 years old, right, she should cover her hair. If it's just covering up beauty, like much of tzniut is or seems to be, therefore a woman should really cover her hair when she's a child. If we're being honest, but they don't. They only in Judaism, only a married woman covers her hair. Why? L'romez al haniskar, to hint to this idea. A woman is the flame. A woman is the flame, the candle that reflects the light of her husband, and that needs to be covered. That only happens when she's married, when she has a husband. He says there's he says he gives some other reasons, also a little too deep for our class perhaps, but there's other hints to the fact that this light, this kedusha, this holiness is transferred over to a woman from her husband if she's worthy. I guess also obviously he's worthy. Okay, let's look at one of the last Rashis on this whole episode. We know Yitzchak found, obviously, Yitzchak takes Rivka, he marries her, and their continued story, their story continues next week's parsha. Meanwhile, though, an interesting pasuk regarding their marriage. Yitzchak Ohala Sara imo. Yitzchak brought her to the tent of Sara, his mother, who was, by the way, deceased. Right? She's not her tent anymore, but we'll see that that's part of the question here. Vikach et Rivka, and he took Rivka. In other words, he became with Hilo Lisha, and she became for him a wife. Veha, and he loved her. V'inachem Yitzchak achrei imo, and he was comforted after his mother's death. Okay. First of all, as is often pointed out, the idea of him loving her happened after he married her. In Judaism, you don't love somebody and then you marry them. In Judaism, we believe marriage isn't love isn't something that's instant, love at first sight or anything like that. Love happens over time, over respecting each other, over years of getting to know each other, and love grows that way. And only after they were married did he love her. This is very different from the American understanding of how love works. So he brought her into the tent, and so Rashi wants to know, why is this called Sarah's tent? After all, she has passed away many psukim earlier, in the previous chapter of the Torah, in the beginning of the parsha. So says Rashi, let's get the whole Rashi maybe even with the English onto the screen. Yeah, so you can follow along. Sara imo, dugumat Sara imo. When he brought her into the tent, somehow she took on Sarah's dugma. Could be appearance, but it could also mean the same feeling. He had the feeling for her, this emotional love for her, the same kind of love that he had for his mother as well. Kolomar, v'harei Sarah imo. Why else would the pasuk tell us that it was the tent of Sarah, his mother? Shekol zman shesara kayemet, as long as Sarah was alive, right? And here we have very famous Rashi. Haya ner daluk me'erev Shabbat le'erev Shabbat. The light that she lit erev Shabbat lasted till the next erev Shabbat, lasted a whole week. Right? Ubracha mitzuya be'isa, and there was a blessing in the dough. In other words, it didn't spoil. Anan kashur al ha'ol, and there was a cloud constantly over the tent. V'misha meta pasku, and as soon as Sarah died, all of that went away. Ukeshabat Rivka, and when Rivka came, Chazru came back. This is the Midrash Rishit Rabbah. And so all of these three blessings came back thanks to the fact that now Rivka is taking over Sarah's position. Now the big question is, not really a big question, but it's an interesting question. Why these three things? Why doesn't it say whatever clothes Sarah sewed, mended, stayed in good condition for eternity? Why these three things? So says the Gur Aryeh, right away. He says Neged Gimel Mitzvot. These three things aren't just a coincidence. These three things are all the three mitzvot for which a woman is responsible, that become the women's mitzvot, for lack of a better word. Bracha mitzuya. This blessing was found in the isa, in the dough. Neged challah. We have the mitzvah. There's a mitzvah of challah. Challah doesn't mean to bake challah. Challah means to take from dough a certain amount that should be donated to the Kohen when we were sure who the Kohanim were. Ever since Galut, ever since we're in the diaspora, we basically take that pinch of challah, or that handful of challah, and we burn it, but nobody else eats it because it really is designated for the Kohen. And the candles that were lit, that's obviously neged the candle lighting. That's a mitzvah for women. Of course, men are obligated in that too. By the way, men are obligated in the challah also. If a man wants to bake bread, he also has to take challah. If he doesn't have a wife to do it, he does it. If he does have a wife to do it and she's not available, he does it. Same thing by candles. You need to have light in your house on Shabbat. A man is obligated to light candles if he doesn't have a wife or a mother to do that for him. And that's perfectly fine. And he makes the bracha and everything. Yeah. The anan kashra ohel. And what about this last one? This cloud that was constantly on the ohel. What mitzvah is that keneged? Hanan hakavod hu shchinat hakavod yitbarach. This cloud is neged the shchina, the Hashem's presence that should be felt in the house. This is because of the holiness and purity of the Jewish woman. The Jewish woman brings into her house, by keeping the laws of Nida, of Mikvah, this Tahara, this purity, creates a sort of harmony and peace in the house. That is because the Shekhinah is resting upon it. Hashem's presence can be felt in this house because of its holiness. This is what a woman can do. This is the power of a woman. Right? The challah, the nerot, and the tahara and the purity are all things. The woman's covering her hair, as we learned before. All of these are parts of a Jewish marriage, and have been parts of Jewish marriage for generations, for as long, definitely since the time of the Talmud, and as we can see here, since the time of our patriarchs and matriarchs. That's what I have for you tonight. A few lessons. The Gur Aryeh continues. If you want to, some beautiful ideas. I definitely invite you to look at that source. It's available to you anytime you like. I'm going to stop sharing the screen right now. I'm going to pause. I'm going to stop the recording in case there's any questions you might have.